Welcome back to this continuing series on the making of a super cool button-up men's collar shirt using New Look 6197. We're working on View A, and so far we've made it through steps 1 through 6 in the instructions. I skipped steps 7 to 9, which is an optional decorative loop. Feel free to do that bit on your own, or you can skip it like me. And now it's time to get to work on the star attraction of our project, which is, of course, the collar. This next segment takes you through step 11. The instructions say to stitch 5/8 of an inch all along the long curvy edge of the interfaced collar piece. To get a nice even stitch, I like to mark my stitching line in advance. I set my seam gauge to 6/8 of an inch and mark little dots all along the edge through the hole near the end of the ruler. Then I connect the dots and voila! You'll see me actually mark the seam line all along all 4 edges, which is recommended, but the most important one in my opinion is that curvy long edge, which is the focus of step 11. Use your ruler to quickly mark the lines along the straight edges. The curvy edge you'll have to do by hand. Take your time. The more dots you've made, the easier it'll be. Do you see those blue circles? Those were transferred over from the pattern piece. Here's a reminder to make sure that you too have transferred those over to your fabric. And here's what mine looked like after I was done stitching. Now it's going to be time to clip up to the 2 circles, like so. When you clip, you want to make sure that you're getting right up to the stitching line, but do not cut through the threads. Take the portion between the circles and crease along the stitching line. Then you can give it a nice pressing. To finish step 11, trim the seam allowance between the circles. Moving on to step 12, we're going to take the 2 collar pieces, layer them with right sides together, pin and stitch along the edges, and then turn the whole thing right side out. For this part, it's very important that you stitch only along the straight edges, like so. Trim the excess fabric at the corners as shown, cutting up to but not through the stitches at the corners. Then you can trim the seam allowances along the straight edges to about 3/8 of an inch. If you want the points of the collar to turn out extra nice, trim a little bit extra at the corners as shown. Turn the whole shebang right side out and go ahead and use a point turner tool to perfect those corners. Be firm but not too forceful when poking out those corners. Otherwise, you might end up with holes. When you're ready, give it a nice pressing. Our collar is looking beautiful. Let's set that aside and turn back to step 10, which is going to involve attaching the front facing pieces to finish the front edges of the shirt. By now, you should have already applied interfacing to each of these pieces. Fold 1/4 inch along the edges shown here and press. Stitch all along the pressed edges. Pin the facing pieces to the corresponding front edges of the shirt. Naturally, you'll want to pin with right sides together. Stitch along the pinned edges. Fold the facing pieces along the seam lines and press. Next, you're going to understitch, which means stitching the facing piece to the seam allowances underneath, just about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line. Now you can go ahead and turn the facings to the inside of the shirt and press along the seam line. The understitching you did in the last step is going to make this part super easy. With that out of the way, we can turn back to step 13. Step 13 says to clip the neck edge of garment to stay stitching. Stay stitching just means that you've stitched 1/2 inch away all along the neckline edge. You actually should have done this before attaching the front facing pieces. Create a series of little clips all along the neckline edge. Clip up to, but definitely not through, the stay stitching line. It's really important that you keep your stay stitches to within 1/2 inch from the neckline edge. Here I'm creating wedges to mark the notches and the center back of the shirt to distinguish these marks from my clips. See those blue circles near the front edge of the shirt? Make sure that you have marked those circles as well. Now grab the collar and find the notches and circles along the edge of the uninterfaced layer. Pin the collar to the neckline edge, matching notches to notches and placing the circles at the shoulder seams. Remember those circles near the front edge of the shirt along the neckline? That's where you'll be placing the outer edge of the collar. Notice that between the outer edges of the collar and the small circles at the shoulder seams, you're going to be stitching 3 layers, both layers of the collar and the neckline edge of the shirt. Pin these regions with care to make sure that all 3 layers are lined up beautifully along their edges. Between the small circles, you'll have just 2 layers to pin and ultimately stitch. In this region is also where you'll find those notches to match and pin. Once you're all pinned up, you can stitch 5/8 of an inch away from the neckline edge. Between the small circles at the shoulder seams, remember you'll be stitching 2 layers only, so do not catch the interfaced layer in your stitches in that region. And here's how it looks when you're done stitching. Moving right along to step 14, you're going to turn the front facing pieces to the outside, matching up the curved portion of the facing piece to the neckline, and you're going to pin in that region and stitch. To help the facing and neckline match up with one another, you'll need to clip the facing layer. Make sure that you keep your clips to about 3/8 of an inch deep, no deeper. And here's what mine looked like after I was done stitching. The next thing to do is to trim the entire neckline seam allowance. Shave off about 1/4 inch, reducing the seam allowance to about 3/8 of an inch. Cut a little extra at the corners as shown here. Find your point turner tool and flip those facing pieces right side out. At this point, we can really start to see our collar taking shape. You'll see that the edges of the facing are designed to rest along the shoulder seam. And then you'll be dealing with this little bit of seam allowance at the edge, which I want you to clip up to the seam line as shown. And what this is going to allow us to do is to flip the seam allowance between the shoulder seams up into the collar. So we're basically using the collar to hide away that ugly little bit of seam allowance. Find your iron and press those seam allowances upwards. then spend some time pressing the rest of the collar and facing. Houston, we have a collar. One thing left to do, and that's in step 15. We're going to be stitching the pressed edge of the collar over the neck seam, following the diagram, and we'll also be hand stitching the edges of the facings to the shoulder seam allowances. With that done, all that's left to do is to feast your eyes on your handiwork. Wow, you did it. You made a collar. But we're not done yet. Join me next time and we'll be stitching up the side seams and slapping on some sleeves.